Welcome to Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. My name is Chris Schmedeke, and I'm your host today. And we are talking Broncos on a Monday. It's afternoon now. We're recording a little bit later because Sean Payton took his sweet time at his press conference. So I'm joined by two guys who do not take days off like Ferris Bueller. Those guys, that is Chris Thomason. Chris, how are you today?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm old enough to have seen the movie when it actually came out, first run in a theater.
And I'm also joined by Kyle Fredrickson. Kyle, so like you're young. I'm like in the middle of you two on age, but do you remember Ferris Bueller as well as Sean Payton?
100%. My
Yeah.
mother introduced me to a lot of 80s cinema,
Yeah.
which has got to be a top 10 for me. I've always wanted to just jump into a parade and lead it. That's the biggest takeaway for me. That would be a life crowning moment to pull that off.
Well, all right. We will get to the Sean Payton Bo Nix relationship. I guess maybe we'll break that down a little bit later. But let's talk about the win. Broncos beat the Raiders 34-18. Early on it didn't look good. Raiders driving down the field. The first series they scored a long pass to Brock Bowers. Broncos punt. Raiders go back down. It's 10-0. Broncos kick a field goal, and then the Raiders are driving once again, and everything changed with the Pat Surtain interception that he returned 100 yards. So, Chris, let's start there. How much of a game-changing play was that?
Colossal. They've got, I believe, the second and five, I think it was, at the Denver 13. They're moving the ball up and down the field. A 17-3 lead is very realistic. And then, boom, horrible pass by Gardner Minshew and Pat Surtain, 100 yards back to, as he said, took it to the crib. I've rarely seen a quarterback just fall apart the way Minshew did. I
Yeah.
mean, he completed his first 8 passes. He was leading him up and down the field. He had a perfect NFL passer rating of 158.3, and then he just self-destructed and then ended up getting benched. And the Broncos defense figured him out. They started getting pressure on him. They started keeping him in the pocket when he had a couple of runs. And then the secondary stepped up. They ended up having 3 interceptions on the day, 2 by Surtain, one of his off O'Connell, who would replace Minshew. And then Riley Moss gets his first career interception.
So, Kyle, this we've talked about Surtain's start to the season. He didn't have to cover Devontae Adams yesterday because Devontae Adams doesn't want to play for Vegas anymore. We covered that already. But this start to the season is one of the best, I have to say, by a Broncos cornerback. I know Champ Bailey had some great starts, but this is ridiculous what Surtain is doing.
Yeah, and it is why Paul Klee, wrote the column that he did after that game, and that's that Surtain should be a leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And I think right now it's really hard to argue against that because in the one game where you could have said, hey, he was a little bit shaky in that Steelers loss, he still held George Pickens to, I think, just 2 catches. So, yeah, there's just really no other corner in the league who's, demanding this type of respect. Because when you do throw it his way, more likely than not, Pat Surtain's going to make a play on the ball. And I will say, CT alluded to it. He was sort of gifted kind of these big plays in the Raiders game. But at the same point, he made the plays, right? Like we've seen this Bronco team squander those opportunities. And here they go, scoring points off of turnovers. And going into this game, they, I think, maybe had just 1 or 2 interceptions on the entire season. So to get 3 in one game is huge. For Riley Moss, as CT mentioned, to get his first one, I've been really impressed with Moss. The man coverage skills, even when he does get beat, he's been right there on his opponent's hip. So a lot to like about this Broncos team. And once again, winning with a similar formula, right? Kind of shaky start for the offense. Defense holds a minute, and then Bo Nix does enough in the second half to get the team going, and then they get a victory.
Well, Chris, I want to talk about Riley Moss a little bit because it's got to be tough to play that other side next to a great corner.
Yeah, but he's been stepping up, and when he gets beaten, he doesn't get down. He just gets ready for the next play. And he said something interesting after the game on Sunday that same play, that same pattern had been run successfully against him in the previous 4 games. So this time he was ready, and he gets the interception. So, he's a little up and down because this is a guy who's in his first year as a starting cornerback, and he's going opposite of Surtain, so they're trying to pick on him. But he just dusts himself off if there's a catch against him, and yeah, he's usually close. I mean, usually if there is a catch, as Kyle noted, he's still right there to make the tackle. I mean, you don't have guys catching the ball and then getting, after the catch yardage, 15, 20 yards down the field.
Yeah, and Kyle, the secondary as a whole, Jaquan McMillan's been good. They talk about him on every broadcast now. Brennan Jones, we've talked about making plays. PJ Locke did get burned by Brock Bowers on that touchdown and was actually burned again. And was it Minshew or O'Connell who missed him down the sideline when he was open? I think it was still Minshew then. I can't remember which quarterback it was, but this secondary, where we at the beginning of the year had questions. We didn't know, you're losing Justin Simmons, you're having two new starting safeties, another, Riley Moss is coming in. They signed Levi Wallace, who doesn't play. um, the secondary has gone from being a concern to a full-blown strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got to praise Jim Leonard, I think, for a
Yeah.
lot of that, right? They bring in the new DBs coach, the longtime coach at Wisconsin. Well, he was a coordinator at Wisconsin and then got elevated. But yeah, I think it's as good as you could have asked this group to play. They're really showing up. And you mentioned earlier in that Raiders game, I remember looking at CT and being like, oh gosh, are they in for a long day? Going down 10-0. There were some missed tackles for the first time that we'd seen in a while in that secondary. But give them credit for the way that they turned around. And, I think that 100-yard return by Surtain really just lit a fire throughout this whole group, right? Once again, the pass rush was there. Multiple sacks, I think, in every game so far for the team this year. And a lot of those sacks are coverage sacks, right? Guys not finding anything downfield. And then these quarterbacks starting to panic. The Broncos have taken full advantage. So, hats off to Vance Joseph. We talked about him last week and the way that he's really kind of rebranded his image. Yet another game where he's going to be a hot topic in this community. And, I would not be shocked to see him get, interviews for head coaching jobs, given I have no insider knowledge on that happening.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring up Vance Joseph next, Chris, because he wasn't like they were talking about him on Good Morning Football today about how he was like the coach of the week. It's time to start putting respect on him a little bit more this time. But his game plan seemed a little bit different. It didn't seem like they were blitzing as much this week.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say Kyle just said hats off to Vance Joseph. He was wearing a hat, but he did not take his hat
Oh, yeah,
off.
I should have taken it off. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
We'll miss that on the video.
come
Yeah.
off. Okay,
Next time.
let's make sure that has occurred. Yeah, he's mixing up things well, Vance Joseph. That's been kind of the trait all season, moving guys around. And then when they do get the sacks, they've been coming from all sorts of different places. Safeties have had them, outside linebackers, inside linebackers, defensive linemen. I mean, on the conference call today, Sean Payton was asked about Vance Joseph, and he lauded them, and he cited that the two key differences this year have been the improved defensive line. You're adding John Franklin Myers and Malcolm Roach. They've both been kind of like tag team guys coming in, and Zach Allen also has taken a step up. And then he mentioned also the secondary that you touched upon. I mean, all four guys have been solid after there were some questions at several spots.
Jonathan Cooper is somebody who we don't talk about a lot, Kyle, but he's got 4 sacks on the year. They're going to have to pay him soon, right?
Yeah, he is in a contract year.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think that he has shown, and and in the absence, Baron Browning is not playing. We haven't really mentioned that either. Like, he's out, Nick Benito's playing over there, but Jonathan Cooper has really developed as a guy who was a 7th round draft pick, has really developed into an elite pass rusher for this team.
Yeah, and just from a reporter's perspective, a joy to talk to, right?
He's
Like, I
always
think,
got clips, yes.
yeah, every time that locker room opens, it seems like there's a crowd around him, and it makes sense because he's very welcoming. I think he takes this captain role seriously as a guy who's willing to answer questions. And why wouldn't you want to talk when you're playing as well as he is, right? He's certainly a huge leader on this team. in the defense without Alex Singleton on the field. I imagine that kind of increases his vocal role and making sure guys are in the right spots, and just dynamic. And I got to say, one guy we don't talk about quite enough on this podcast is Nick Bonito as
Yeah.
well, right? I mean, it seems like that bend that he has, I don't want to compare anyone to Von Miller because he was the master of it, but he has that similar thing where like his body doesn't seem like it should bend that far when he's rushing. He's able to work around those tackles and get to the quarterback. So yeah, I think Chris mentioned it coming from all angles, but those outside linebackers really are a strength. And yeah, they'll have to figure out a way to pay Jonathan Cooper or see if they want to let him test the market. But based on how he's playing right now, I can't imagine the Broncos would want to lose any of these guys.
Well, and Chris, this defense, we talked about it last week, and they've been talking about on the broad. They've got the one first round pick, a lot of guys, late round picks. This kind of shows the roster building like success that George Payton can have, who's heard plenty of crap, for lack of a way of putting it, but he has built this defense through, undrafted guys and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. I mean, Jonathan Cooper, who you just touched upon, was a late round draft pick. I mean, PJ Locke, undrafted. And then you look at some of the moves that have been made in recent drafts. They kind of target a player that they like a Riley Moss, and kind of trade up to get him, getting Moss in the third round. So, yeah, George Payton obviously has taken a lot of heat last few years for the hiring of Nathaniel Hackett and the huge contract after trading for Russell Wilson. But he has made a lot of savvy player personnel moves, and a lot of that has been related to the defense. I mean, Zach Allen, who we touched upon, signing him, he was their key free agent last year. And then when they had a chance to get John Franklin Myers from the Jets for next to nothing, I mean, they pounced on it.
Yeah, the trade for him, yeah, that's another one to remember. He was looking to fight yesterday too. John Franklin Myers down there on the goal line. All right, well, let's flip to everybody's favorite part of the game, and that's the Bo Nix, Sean Payton heated discussion on the sideline. Kyle, you had a story on that in today's Denver Gazette about this whole thing. I mean, I'll just ask you guys, and I know it's complete speculation. What was it even about?
I would say, just to chime in first here, it seems like it stemmed over a play call on the missed opportunity to Troy Franklin. That play had been flipped. It was supposed to go to the other side of the field. The way that Nix described it in the post game was that through that confusion, he kind of just did the best he could to get the call out. As you guys know, these are very long play calls from Sean Payton. I think it might have taken a bit to get it into the huddle. And they made the best with what they had. And I will say, if they score a touchdown there, then maybe there isn't, any moment at all for us to
No.
be had, right? Like, we're one Troy Franklin catch away from this viral moment never happening. So I will say it feels like at this point, the cause of that whole scuffle, or whatever you want to call it, is less important than how it was handled, right? I mean, a year ago we saw Peyton ripping into Russell Wilson, and Wilson just kind of taking it and looking stunned. Well, this was the opposite, right? Like, we're up in the press box, and I remember leaning over to CT and pointing down there, "Hey, they're going at it," and it was really Nick's the one who was doing the jawing. So a lot you can take away from it. There's going to be a lot of hot takey sports radio stuff that goes on this week about how big that was, and maturity, and standing up to Peyton. I think a lot of that's true, but it is a 30-second moment in a long game, I will say, just to put a little bit of context on it.
Well, Chris, there's been a lot. I've seen a lot of stories and stuff on social media that Sean Payton actually kind of likes that from his quarterback. Do you think that's kind of true?
Yeah, he said that today on the conference call. He likes the grit of Bo Nix. He likes how much he loves football, and he kind of likes that. I mean, Peyton doesn't mind, guys going at him and stuff of that nature. I mean, and that sort of stuff. I mean, if it's going to help a situation potentially, I mean, he wants to hear from his quarterback. And it was touched upon, Russell Wilson at Detroit last year, how he just stood there and took it. I mean, Russell Wilson last year was a quarterback to quote another 1980s movie, who was running scared. I
Oh
mean,
boy.
he was wondering if he was going to return to the Broncos. He had a $37 million option for 2025. So he was more, yes, sir, no, sir. I'd like to stick around here, but, Nix is going to be the guy here for years to come. They're not cutting him, they're not benching him, and he can state his peace of mind without the fear of retribution.
And to add one more thing on that, it's just a sign that this is a healthy relationship,
Yeah.
right? Coach and quarterback. There needs to be pushback on both sides. Like those guys need to push each other to be better. And to Sean Payton's credit, maybe this is a chance for him to reflect on his own ego a little bit, right? Like, why was Nick so upset? Maybe it's all on Nick's, but I don't know that there's many people in that entire franchise who would talk to Sean Payton like Bo Nix did in that moment. So, that to me shows me that Nix is comfortable in his own skin already. I mean, this is only week 4, week 5 of the NFL season. He's a rookie, and already, he's kind of showing us these moments of, all right, like he is the real deal, and he's ready for this moment, right? Like he wants this. And I also love the way that Nix handled it too, right? I'm sure he put a little bit of thought into this, but he gets asked about that conversation. He says, oh, well, he said he loved me and I said I loved him back. So just a great little tongue-in-cheek kind of another confidence builder for a guy who's got some moxie. He's making a lot of friends in Broncos country, as Mark Kisla noted in the lead of his column after the game.
It was kind of cool too that he wore a John Elway jersey to the game and at his press conference, although I think he should have worn a Craig Morton jersey. It was the 1977 throwback, but I'll give him a pass on that.
Well, we could have a whole other podcast about how crisp those uniforms were. That was nice looking in that sun yesterday. That look
Will they be
on
permanent?
TV.
Like, I'm curious if they'll make them permanent because the Chargers kind of did that, right? They had so much love for their throwbacks, and then they just kind of made that their real thing.
I think like they still haven't even worn the blue jersey yet, right? The new blue
Yeah.
jersey. So I think they still with them switching the jerseys, I can't imagine they do that, but we need to see that at least 2, 3 times a year. That's
Yeah.
for sure. It looked
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, they did. They have won 3 Super Bowls with their current jerseys, including in the first 2
Fair.
seasons they had them. So there are some supporters of those jerseys.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Bad things happened in Super Bowls in those jerseys they wore yesterday. That's true. Well, one more thing on the Knicks, Sean Payton stuff. How important is Davis Webb to that relationship?
Well, I'll jump in because I did a story from the Combine on the importance of Davis Webb. Yeah, I think he's a young guy. He was playing quarterback in the NFL just 2 years ago, and he really can relate to these younger quarterbacks. Maybe nothing against some of the older assistant coaches, but he's able to relate to them more. And I had written a story from the Combine talking to some folks just about how important Davis Webb played in the drafting and searching for their quarterback. I mean, he was a key guy during the workouts, giving advice to Sean Payton. And he's a guy that, he's the quarterback coach, of course. He's a guy that Payton has really started to listen to.
Kyle, you kind of agree with that too?
100%. And I do think being a younger guy, more relatable to Knicks is a factor, right? He's a rookie. I think that communication, sometimes you need kind of maybe the good cop, bad cop dynamic. And Webb clearly has something going.
What is there, 4 years difference in age between them? 4 or 5 years probably? What's Davis Webb, 29, 30?
Right. Yeah. They could have been college teammates for how long Knicks was playing.
Well, yeah, yeah, that's true too. All right, Kyle, you and I always joke about the Marvin Mims minute kind of deal, but he had him a minute and a moment yesterday. Almost not as important as the pick six, but pretty close as that big punt return he had that set up a touchdown. He got to flash a little bit yesterday.
He did. He did. That was a big unheralded moment in the game. I believe he also had a nice end around run on the offense. Might have been his only touch, if I recall. But yeah, it seems like he's a guy who the Broncos got to continue to try to get involved with his speed, whether it's on special teams or offense. You might as well throw Troy Franklin into the conversation as well. I
He's
think,
catch the ball.
yeah, that's true. He needs to catch the touchdown, but he did have his first NFL reception, I think, earlier in the game. Is that right, CT?
Who's that?
Franklin.
Troy Franklin. Did he have his
Oh
first
no,
game?
he got him a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay. So right.
Yeah.
So he's being more involved, right? I'd like to see him maybe get an end around as well. That might be easier to hold on to show off some of that speed. But yeah, to your original point though, to Mims to have that big return is key in a year where we haven't seen a lot of, special teams heroics of the new kickoff rule.
Well,
Yeah,
if
he
I could jump in, I mean, I asked Sean Payton that last week. I said it seems to me that Mims has become basically a return specialist, to which he bristled. I mean, here's the guy, Sean Payton, who in three different states earlier this year, Florida at the owners' meeting, Indianapolis at the combine, and here in Colorado said, we're going to make Mims a more focal part of the offense. It hasn't happened at all. And it still remains a mystery why. I think he had one catch for like 7 yards yesterday, and it came in the fourth quarter when the game was out of reach. But hey, I mean, he's a weapon, and he's showing it with that 17-yard run and the 38-yard punt return.
So here's what I want to talk about now, and that's we touched on this last week about, are the Broncos good? Like, are they like now they're 3-2. They had, I mean, what's the last time? They beat the Raiders for the first time in 4 years. They scored 34 points. Kyle is, I mean, are they good? I don't know.
I think we've seen enough games now to say the Broncos are in the mix for the playoffs,
Yeah.
after 5 games. And it's early in such a long season, but they're one of those, 3-2 teams. There's a bunch of 2-3 teams that after a while, they're going to start creating separation. But I think they will continue to be in the hunt and in position for a wild card, behind Kansas City, of course, if the defense continues to do its thing. Like, it's just so much easier for everything to operate well when you're creating turnovers and putting your offense in positions to succeed when they've been a little bit shaky, right? I think that's going to mask so many of the issues that the Broncos have on offense, which I still think they have quite a few, if the defense dominates, because they've got all of the injuries up front on their offensive line. There's been some drops with the receivers group. The running game has been a little sporadic, of course. But all that doesn't matter when your team has a top 5 defense. And once again, the Broncos showed that they did. So, for being still a weird team that's not winning pretty all the time, I think we've seen enough to say that this is a team that has turned the page on last year and at least should be competitive in the rest of these games to go along.
Chris, real quick, any injury update from Sean Payton today? I know they've got some offensive linemen hurt.
Alex Palchowski has an ankle injury. NFL media reported he has a high ankle sprain. If
Yikes.
that's the case, he's certainly going to be out for a couple of weeks. Payton didn't address that. And Luke Wattenberg didn't play the last 10 snaps on Sunday. And Alex Forsythe came in, but I don't know the extent of his injury. I mean, the game was out of hand then, so could have been just a case of, let's bring in Forsythe, get a look at him. The game's over. So, but yeah, there's some folks obviously banged up on the offensive line. Payton said he likes the depth. I mean, they've got Matt Pert. Wouldn't be surprised if he steps in at right tackle against the Chargers this week, which would be their third right tackle this week since Mike McGlinchey is still on IR with a knee injury. But, after that, I think the depth starts getting thin. Frank Crum, he's an undrafted rookie. He's got great potential, but that could get rough if they have to throw him out there for major snaps.
So, Chris, kind of going off of what we were talking about with Kyle, like, are now the playoffs like the realistic kind of vision for this team?
Well, I'm hoping we can wait until the podcast entering the November 3rd Baltimore game.
Okay.
Because these next 3 games are pivotal. This is the soft part of the Broncos schedule. They've got the Chargers at home, at New Orleans. That'll be the toughest of the 3. And then the Panthers, which should be easy. They obviously have to win a minimum of 2 of those 3 heading into back-to-back games at Baltimore and at Kansas City. And then the schedule will get a lot tougher toward the end of the year. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with Cincinnati, but they close the season at the Chargers, at Cincinnati, home to the Chiefs. Maybe the Chiefs will be playing nobody in that game. But this is the soft part of their schedule, and they have to take advantage of it. If they win at least two of the next three, they'll put themselves in great position, I think, heading down the stretch.
Well, yeah, and it seems like the NFL, everybody is 3-2 or 2-3 right now, except for, a certain couple teams here and there. So it'll be interesting. Before we go, Kyle, how big of a mess are the Raiders?
Ooh. It doesn't seem good, right? And when you don't have a quarterback and you have drama at other positions, it just seems like this is a team that's destined to maybe not finish the season with Antonio Pierce as head coach. And for all the success I think economically that this team has and moving to Vegas, I mean it's been kind of a dumpster fire ever since then. So we'll see what happens, but I will say that's when I examine this Broncos win and all the positives that we take from this. It doesn't feel like that's a Raiders team that's going to have much success the rest of the way.
No, it seems like it's definitely falling apart for Pierce and that kind of group. But it's crazy. Max Crosby is still unbelievable. I know he had 2 sacks again yesterday. The broadcast said, is that 10 straight games against the Broncos? He's had a sack. But I wonder when he gets fed up there too. So that could be interesting. All right. So like you said, next week is the Chargers. We will preview that matchup on Friday. Broncos are underdogs. Chargers 2.5 point favorite as of
Wow.
now. That seems crazy to me. Chargers don't have any receivers. They don't. I mean, and Herbert's kind of banged up, so that'll be interesting. So we will get together on Friday to preview that matchup. These guys have all their coverage over at denvergazette.com. It's a busy week on this podcast. We're going to preview the Avs season tomorrow with Evan. And then Tyler King and I are going to preview the huge college football matchup that's at Folsom Field this week with K-State being in town for CU. And us three will get together again on Friday. So it's a busy week in the Colorado sports landscape. So, guys, thanks for coming on. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify, and we will talk with you later this week.